to this conversation that is sponsored by the Helis Foundation. We're so excited to have the Chicago-based artist Edra Soto here at NOMA to speak about her own practice and kind of just speak in dialogue and in conversation with the exhibition that we're standing in right now, Carlos Rolón Outside In. And I will just kind of give a few brief words about Edra and introduce her and her practice, as well as NOMA's curator of modern and contemporary art, Katie Full, who will be in conversation with Edra for this project. So Edra Soto is a Chicago-based interdisciplinary artist, educator, curator, and co-director of the outdoor project space, The Franklin. She is invested in her practice in creating and providing visual and educational models propelled by empathy and generosity. Her recent projects are motivated by civic and social actions, focusing on fostering relationships within a wide range of communities. Edra has exhibited at several museums, including the Pérez Art Museum in Miami, Hunter East Harlem Gallery, the University of Illinois at Chicago Gallery, Gallery 400, the DePaul Art Museum, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. And she's also been the recipient of numerous grants and fellowships, including the Efroymson Contemporary Arts Fellowship, the DCASE for Individual Artist Grant from the City of Chicago, and the Three Arts Foundation Make a Wave Grant. She's been a resident at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, Beta Local in Puerto Rico, and the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation residency, as well as many others. And in 2017, Project Row Houses in Houston, Texas, hosted her residency as part of the 222 exchange program in partnership with the Hyde Park Art Center. Edra is a prolific artist, but also a curator who organized Present Standard at the Chicago Cultural Center very recently, and she also is a lecturer for the Contemporary Practices Department at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, from which she holds an MFA. So we're so excited again to have Edra here in New Orleans, and I would just like to introduce Katie Full, NOMA's curator of modern and contemporary art, to just say a few words about this exhibition in advance of the program. So thank you again all for coming.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you so much to everyone for being here today. When we started thinking about an artist to bring in to be in dialogue with Carlos's exhibition for our quarterly lecture that is sponsored generously by the Helis Foundation, Edra's was the first voice that came to mind. She shares with Carlos a lot of very striking similarities. They both live and work in Chicago, and both use various elements of their Puerto Rican background and heritage in their work, but to very different ends. Carlos's exhibition that we're standing in right now was organized by the New Orleans Museum of Art in response to a residency that Carlos did at the Joe Mitchell Center in 2017. Carlos, as I said, based in Chicago, born and raised in Chicago, a first-generation Puerto Rican immigrant, whose work is in large measure motivated by thinking through the ways in which his own kind of hybrid cultural identity can help us think about contemporary cultural questions surrounding home, identity, immigration, and borders. So, like Edra, Carlos often works with what are called rejas, or wrought iron fences, in Puerto Rico, which is a very strong and active tradition in Puerto Rico, and one that has, as anyone who has been in New Orleans French Quarter knows, quite a great resonance in New Orleans. So Carlos's exhibition, in large part, is trying to think through and understand this unexpected confluence of artists and artisans in New Orleans and in Puerto Rico, both using this kind of elaborate wrought iron tradition, and to think about the various histories and cultures that that represents, looking at wrought iron as a legacy of Spanish and French colonialism, and of the many different cultural voices that have come to define culture in both New Orleans and places like Puerto Rico, as well as the broader Caribbean. So Carlos's work consists of a series of manipulations of these reja patterns, as well as real wrought iron, sourced both from New Orleans and from Puerto Rico. And in large measure, the exhibition is really kind of trying to bring new voices and new perspectives into the museum. And we're going to talk a bit about this later, but one of the points about the exhibition I wanted to quickly highlight is Carlos's Hustle Man cart that you see on this far wall here, which has been an opportunity for NOMA to begin to experiment with new ways of bringing in different voices and communities to the museum. So over the course of the past 5 months of the show, we've had a different different groups of artists, artist collectives, local outreach organizations, community activists come in and do projects on the cart that really, in many ways, tried to literalize the idea behind the show's title of bringing the outside in and thinking in new ways about how NOMA can serve as a platform for community dialogue and debate and begin to break down the borders and walls that, in many ways, these Rehab patterns represent. So as I think we'll see as we talk, Edra's work is also very invested in similar kinds of issues and questions, and she works with this idea and this motif of wrought iron to kind of try and work through and understand questions related to immigration, related to ideas of home and identity in a kind of diasporic context. So she asked me, God help us all, to begin by sharing a poem from one of her recent projects, which I will pass around here. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So one of Edra's, I think, most exciting and ongoing series of work is called Graft, where she takes different elements of Puerto Rican wrought iron patterns and grafts them onto buildings, doors, windows, grates, in places all across the country and world. And as part of this project, she works with an interdisciplinary group of artists and activists and politicians and writers to create these kind of magazines that offer perspectives on many of the issues her work tries to address. So there's several of the actual magazines that she creates for this project on the bench right here, which you're welcome to look at and take. And then also a really great little paper that she created specifically for this project today that you're welcome to take with you. So the poem that she chose to begin this lecture is a poem written by the poet Cristina Correa that was written after Edra's first graft project in Chicago in 2013, called Leave It Open When You Leave. No one ever asked the house where it came from, where it's going, and why. No one gave the tree permission to breathe. This is a transplant, but not of the body. There are no bodies here. Just screens, carved walls for words to pass through. Look through this gritty air and imagine yourself gone. Tell me the time they tried to teach you that you weren't from here and how you brought yourself anyway. Your walled self, your ornate and broadly gated self, and surrounded them and said, I don't make the rules. They enclose my body like skin. So please join me in welcoming Edra to talk a bit about her work. Thank you so much.
Hi everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very grateful. Thank you for inviting me to be here today and talk about my project. So if you can see there's the iPads here. You can see some of the pictures that I selected of my work to give you some context about, you know, the story I'm going to tell you. So I thought the first thing that I should talk about is where I come from. I grew up in Puerto Rico. I lived there all my life. I grew up there. I did my elementary and high school, and then went to college at a place called Escuela de Artes Plásticas de Puerto Rico. Sorry. And that's where I did my bachelor's. This was a very traditional school. And I did my concentration in painting. So I actually became a painter, and I manifested my work through painting and did a career as a commercial artist. And it was quite successful. That career lasted maybe like 3 years, but it led me to win a fellowship for Puerto Rican artists, to live in Paris for a year, and that living Puerto Rico for the first time really changed my life and my perspective about where's my place in the world. I always had the need to do things beside painting at that point, and I never validated all the rest of the ideas that I had and how to manifest them in other language that was not painting. And so I did things on the side, but eventually going through the Art Institute, it was a very important experience because it teach me how to validate those ideas and how to kind of broaden who I was speaking to. I think the thing that I saw at that time that I felt that limited me through painting was that being at the School of the Art Institute at that time and thinking about painting, it really made me think about painting being in a marketplace or painting speaking to an elite. And I felt that that had nothing to do with my upbringing. I grew up in middle class Puerto Rico and very influenced by mainstream culture. And now I always question the things that I look and that I receive through that filter of mainstream culture. So going to college and to do my MFA, it really teach me about and be critical about the things that I have been receiving through mainstream culture for so many years. So I keep having that conversation in my work. There's a picture here of this church. I grew up in a Catholic church, and the format of the church became really important, and I start seeing the relevance in relation to my work, because I think about the format of the church, I think about the symmetry. Is that construction?
It's construction season, sorry.
So you see there's other pictures here. I think about the theatrics of the church. But I also think about the congregation, the aspects of congregation, how to bring people together. And after a few years developing my work and my practice, I end up realizing how the church really influenced my work. I also start questioning how come this happens, that when you are a child, you become indoctrinated and you have no say in those belief systems. So I think art, I always think of art as something that really allow me and help me, really be myself and have a clear voice, a voice that, only I am the one that construct that narrative. So this picture that you see here, that is some years after grad school. That is called the Franklin, and that is a gathering space. That is also a project space in my backyard. It happened in 2012. It was a collaboration between me and my husband. That's the first time I actually do a collaboration with him. And he's a musician, and he is now a fabricator, a professional fabricator he has his own company. So it's been years of also like both of us developing, what is our life now. He's actually somebody, now I can hire him for all these commissions that I do and projects that I envision, and it's really fantastic. But at this time, that wasn't happening, and so this is something that, I got invited to do an exhibition at a community college, and I told him, I'm tired of making these installations that then I have to figure out how to store them, or that they don't have any use, and I want something that bring people together, that be useful, and that we can maybe keep, or how we make this place. I have a practical side that I need to fulfill through my work. I think there's a big need for me to not separate my real life from my work. I think I look for integrity at all times, because this is what I know. I know my life. I know how to kind of do it through and filter it through the life of art. So that's kind of how it looks. It does have some qualities of the rejas. They have the screens that have ventilation, and it have this graphic pattern. So I started with this because it talks about kind of the natural way that my works segue into a type of social engagement. I really didn't plan to do social engagement per se, or like try to be like, I'm gonna do social engagement. I really, most of it, I have a great need to bring voices together. And I am a huge fan of art. I love art so much. I'm like an art fanatic. My husband as well. And we have a big collection inside our house. We have a big collection of art that was like the Franklin. It was a consequence of my relationship with the artist-run community. So in Chicago, there's commercial galleries, but the artist-run spaces are an important part of the culture of Chicago art culture, because having so many art colleges in Chicago, we have a lot of grad students, bachelor, grad, PhD in the art field. And all these professionals not necessarily are going to have many outlets. And creating spaces that allow for visibility became very important. And right after grad school, that was exactly the place where I felt, where I was people from, especially the Mexican community in Pilsen, they reach out to me. They say, we know about you and your work, and we want you to be a part of this collective. It was called Polvo, and it evolved to other name and called Antenna. And through that project, I got to meet a lot of Latino artists. I did a few exhibitions, and through that type of visibility, I got my first solo exhibition at a museum, at the Museum of Contemporary Art, back in 2009. And that was a huge deal. It taught me about the value of visibility and how that's free. I can provide that to any artist. So having all this art inside our house is important for the Franklin, because when we have the exhibitions at the Franklin, we open our house, we open our home, and that collection becomes also visible, and we are able in that way to share other artists' work. We talk about them. At this point, artists that show in our project space, they give us a piece of art, and because they know we're going to put it in our home and we're going to talk about them. So it's really a very, like a celebratory kind of way of having art in our lives. This picture that you see is my personal documentation of the rejas, which are the gate fences, that raw iron fences from Puerto Rico. These are very personal to me because I grew up in this neighborhood. Like I said, I lived in Puerto Rico 27 years. And I happen to live in this particular neighborhood that is surrounded by this amazing variety of patterns. And back in 2012, I started making drawings of these rejas and these patterns. And then I realized that perhaps through drawing, it was not going to be the right manifestation for me to do these patterns, because I started encountering very similar patterns in many different places, including department stores, hardware stores. I will see like paintings of these patterns at like Home Depot. And I start questioning this. I was thinking, I cannot do something that that participates in a type of type of cultural appropriation, perhaps. I wanted to be very careful about how I use it, because it is very personal to me. It means a lot to me. So I start thinking about how a representation of this rejas. So what I do is I have all these photographs of the rejas in raw iron and also in concrete. They are paired. In a middle-class home in Puerto Rico, the basic shape of the house will be a concrete box that is fenced in its facade, and one of the fences will be quite big. You can open it and place a car inside, and then there's on the other side it will be a half fence and a plant holder, and that will be the facade for a little balcony that kind of is the front, you know, right in front of the kitchen. The format of the houses are very similar, especially in middle-class homes in Puerto Rico. So let me see if I can go do one more. So this will be a picture that I took. Sometimes I take them with fear because like people will be in their houses and I'm snapping pictures and they're like, why are you taking the picture? And I get a little nervous, so sometimes I just snap them thinking I really need the picture, but and then so I will look in my catalog of pictures and I will be like, okay, I get invited to a museum or a gallery to do this architectural intervention. This is what I call it. I always also have to be, I will only use them in reference of architecture. It will have to be a larger scale that truly connects with architecture. And I want to keep the integrity of where the pattern is coming from. So, because the pattern comes from an architectural space or a domestic space, I will keep that relationship. So, I'm not going to try to make an object that have formal qualities. So that would be my philosophy on this pattern. So this is the project row houses that have some similar format, but very different because it's this is a historic site in Houston, and this is one of the historic row houses. And these are shacks made in wood and have the particular shape on top that the houses of Puerto Rico don't have. Maybe I will find a picture. And then I use that pattern in different formats. I also created this imitation of Puerto Rican bus stops. I integrated the pattern. Sometimes you will find those bus stops with different patterns in the back. Because I have what you see here. So this will be one example of a takeaway publication that allows me to collaborate in a deeper way about the history of the fences. So when I started making this project, another part of the project was to try to understand who were the authors of these patterns, of the designs, what is the knowledge about this particular vernacular architecture. And there's really no populous knowledge in Puerto Rico of these patterns. Everybody knows them. Multiple artists will address them, just like design, just like Carlos. There will be other artists in Puerto Rico, like Nora Maite. I have few that I have on my phone. Maybe you can help me. So, one thing about vernacular architecture that I talked about before is that it's not mine. Vernacular architecture is out there and is for grabs, and actually through cultural appropriation you see it everywhere. If you watch the Oscars, it will be right in the backdrop everywhere. So I will go to Macy's and there will be a display with all these patterns, you know. So it's definitely very present in our culture. Now so this is a painting, I don't know if you can see. from Nora Maite. So she used the pattern as well, but she used it in painting. Sorry, I insist on talking about this. All right. Maybe there's one more here that I really want to show you. All right, this is a sculpture from artist Javier Bosques. So he used it, I don't know how many pieces with this kind of work he do, but he have used he repurposed the raw item in a different way, but similar, that Carlos. So there's many artists that use this pattern. So I really have to think hard before I embark on this project and about how am I going to use these patterns for me to feel good about myself because of the personal, how personal they are to me. So I call it graft because I refer to as a skin type of transplant. It's a symbolic transplant from Puerto Rico to any territory in the U.S. I will never show them in Puerto Rico. I never have, I never will. I find that irrelevant and redundant, and that would be me. So if I show them, it have to be in a place in the USA. Puerto Rico is a territory of the U.S., but it's in the Caribbean, and it's where I learned about them because of the relationship in between the U.S. and Puerto Rico, which have been hammocking all my life, and the tension and the glory of it all, to me is important to address it through that relationship. I think so. The newspaper is not only my voice, but it has contributions that allowed to expand on the history, on create a new history for the patterns. So the contributions come from political writers, historians, architects, and then I extended the invitation to artists, even artists that work on similar subject. So that would be another example of just like that one. That is from one of my neighbors' window in Puerto Rico. Can you pass the slide? Yeah, so that would be my representation that I call manual graft. And manual graft is manifested with other people. So I will bring a group of people together. Usually it's people that I have worked with in the past, like preparators or assistants, people that have worked with me. And we all dress in denim, thinking about the working class culture, and we talk about we are going to go out there together and we are going to symbolically build this fence. So it's just a symbolic build-up, and we use metallic adhesive, a type of metallic tape that is very reflective, and it marks really graphically the pattern. And then I have this group with me. We work together and drafting the pattern in front of everybody. We use big pieces of paper to make the templates for the windows. And then at this place that you see in the picture, that was at the Arts Club of Chicago. They had a 100-year anniversary celebration and they invited us. And it was amazing because it's like this, the place is kind of in flux, like people moving and all that, people coming in. And there's been these big scissor lifts, that we are using to like go up to the 14 feet to get the tape, get the pattern done. And we are doing this and everybody's sort of a little confused, what is going on, what is happening here? So, but it's pretty much like I said, I really aim for integrity, integrating and not really like, just completely the myth, you know, the artist as a myth, and like the things that are behind, and just kind of exposing all the parts became sort of important because of how it really relates to the idea of integrating your personal life with your work, with my work, which is my art. Maybe that was a lot. I think I can stop here.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening.